Why would a rookie quarterback, fresh into his NFL career, sit at a podium and openly admit that nothing is promised about his future with the team that drafted him? Not hint at confidence, not project loyalty, just cold, calm honesty. Because the moment Shedeur Sanders said those words, the conversation around the league instantly changed. This wasn't a throwaway media answer. It wasn't nerves, and it definitely wasn't accidental. The press conference was supposed to be routine, just another rookie answering questions before a big rivalry game. But instead of delivering the usual polished response about commitment and trust, Sanders took a different route. He made it clear he controls what he controls and everything else. That's out of his hands. No guarantees, no promises, no emotional attachment to the future. And that's exactly why people leaned in. Because quarterbacks, especially rookies, don't talk like that unless they understand something bigger is happening. Fans of the Cleveland Browns heard uncertainty. Critics heard deflection. But front offices across the league heard awareness, leverage, maturity well beyond his years. The timing made it even louder. This all happened right before Cleveland faced their most hated rival, a moment where most players would hype the matchup, talk about legacy, or lean into emotion. Sanders did none of that. He stayed detached, almost calculated, as if he knew the spotlight wasn't just on the game, it was on his future. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because when a young quarterback refuses to publicly anchor himself to a franchise, it forces a question teams hate answering. Who actually needs who more? The player or the organization? Around the league, rival teams are always watching situations like this, especially stable franchises quietly planning their next move, especially ones in the same division. And while nothing has been said outright, speculation always fills the silence. So the real question is whether Shedeur Sanders wants out. It's whether Cleveland realizes what moment they're standing in. Because statements like that don't come from fear. They come from understanding the game within the game. It didn't sound dramatic when it was said. No raised voice, no frustration, no visible emotion at all. That's what made it hit harder. When Shedeur Sanders was asked whether he felt a commitment from the Browns about being the starter next year, his answer wasn't defensive or rehearsed. It was calm, grounded, and quietly explosive. Nothing's promised. That single phrase flipped the entire conversation. In today's NFL, especially for a rookie quarterback, the expected response is almost automatic. You thank the organization. You express confidence. You talk about earning trust and building something long-term. Sanders did none of that. Instead, he reframed the question entirely. He spoke about control, about focusing on the present, about how he doesn't own an organization and can't dictate the future. On the surface, it sounded philosophical, mature, even respectful. But underneath that calm delivery was a message that made people stop scrolling and start rewatching the clip. Because quarterbacks don't talk like that unless they're very aware of their position. This wasn't Sanders questioning his ability. It wasn't insecurity. If anything, it was the opposite. He didn't plead for reassurance. He didn't ask for validation. He acknowledged reality as it exists in the league. Situations change, organizations pivot, and loyalty only goes so far when nothing is guaranteed. For fans of the Cleveland Browns, that was jarring. After years of instability at quarterback, hearing their young starter openly admit uncertainty felt unsettling. But for league observers, the reaction was very different. They heard a player who understands leverage, timing, and optics. What made the moment even more powerful was how composed he stayed as reporters tried to press him further. The question was repeated, rephrased, nudged, and every time Sanders stayed consistent. He didn't escalate. He didn't clarify it away. He stood on the same idea: control what you can, accept what you can't. That consistency matters. If this were a slip, he would have walked it back. If it were nerves, the wording would have shifted. But it didn't, which suggests intention, Not arrogance, not defiance, just clarity. And that's why this quote traveled so fast. Because once a rookie quarterback publicly acknowledges that nothing is guaranteed, it subtly shifts the power dynamic. It turns the spotlight back on the organization. It forces uncomfortable questions behind closed doors. And it signals to the rest of the league that this player is thinking beyond the next snap. That one sentence didn't just answer a question. It started a conversation the Browns may not have been ready for. A lot of people rushed to label Shedeur Sanders' comments as humility. They heard a young quarterback saying the right things about focus, patience, and controlling what he can control. On the surface, it sounds like maturity. And yes, there's some of that there. But if you stop at humility, you miss the real point entirely. Because this wasn't a rookie playing small. This was a rookie playing smart. When Shedeur Sanders said he doesn't feel entitled to anything and can't promise what happens next year, he wasn't downplaying himself. He was acknowledging the business reality of the NFL, something many veterans avoid saying out loud. That distinction matters. True humility usually comes with reassurance. Players often follow it up with something like, "I trust the organization," or "I believe they believe in me." Sanders didn't do that. He left space, intentional space. And in this league, silence and vagueness can be just as loud as confidence. This is where people misread the moment. If Sanders were unsure of himself, he would have sought affirmation. If he were desperate to be seen as the guy, he would have locked himself to the franchise publicly. Instead, he did the opposite. He placed responsibility back on performance, not promises. That's not insecurity, that's leverage awareness. Think about it from his perspective. He's a rookie thrown into a turbulent situation, coaching uncertainty, protection issues, a franchise still figuring out its direction. In that environment, committing verbally without clarity from the organization would actually be reckless. Sanders knows that. So rather than overcommitting emotionally, he chose to stay grounded in reality. That's not a lack of loyalty, that's self-preservation. For fans of the Cleveland Browns, this distinction is uncomfortable. Browns fans want reassurance. They want certainty. After years of quarterback chaos, they crave someone who says, "This is my team." But Sanders didn't offer comfort. He offered honesty. And honesty feels different when it isn't wrapped in optimism. What really separates this moment from simple humility is consistency. He didn't backtrack. He didn't soften the message when the question was repeated. He didn't clarify it away to calm nerves. He stayed exactly where he was, calm, measured, aware. That's how veterans talk when they understand the system they're operating in. Which leads to the bigger realization. This wasn't about avoiding pressure. It was about refusing to surrender control in a league that takes it quickly from players who aren't paying attention. And once you see it that way, the quote stops sounding modest. It starts sounding deliberate. Context is everything in the NFL, and this is where Shedeur Sanders' comments took on a completely different meaning. If he had said the same thing in June, most people would have brushed it off. If it came after a blowout loss, critics would have blamed frustration. But that's not when it happened. This press conference came right before a matchup with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not just another opponent, not just another game. This is the rivalry that defines seasons for the Cleveland Browns. A week where every word is dissected, every quote becomes fuel, and players are usually coached to lean into emotion. Yet Sanders didn't do that at all. Instead of hyping the rivalry, instead of talking about how much beating Pittsburgh means, Shedeur Sanders stayed completely detached. He said he approaches every game the same. No extra motivation, no added edge, just focus. That response alone raised eyebrows because players, especially young ones, are usually encouraged to embrace moments like this. But when you pair that calm detachment with his earlier comments about nothing being promised, that's when people really started paying attention. Around the league, timing like this is never accidental. Sanders understands what this rivalry represents. He understands how closely these games are watched, not just by fans, but by scouts, executives, and rival organizations. Especially by teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who sit across the field and evaluate Cleveland up close, year after year. This is where speculation starts, not as fact, but as natural league curiosity. Reports don't say Sanders is trying to leave. No one credible is claiming he's angling for a move. But when a quarterback speaks this candidly at this moment, people wonder why. Why now? Why here? Why before the most emotionally charged game on the schedule? One explanation is maturity. Another is self-awareness. Sanders knows that rivalry games magnify everything. He knows every clip will travel faster. He knows his words won't stay local. And instead of using that moment to rally emotions, he used it to plant clarity. That's unusual. Most rookies try to prove they belong emotionally. Sanders acted like someone already thinking long-term. Someone focused less on narratives and more on positioning himself correctly, no matter how the season shakes out. And that's why the timing mattered so much. Because this wasn't said in a vacuum. It was said with the entire division watching. It was said with uncertainty surrounding Cleveland's future. And it was said at a moment when rivals are always taking mental notes. Whether intentional or not, the message landed loudly. And once timing turns a simple answer into a league-wide talking point, it stops being just a quote. It becomes a signal, one that Cleveland can't afford to misread. This is the part of the story Cleveland fans don't like to sit with, but it's impossible to avoid. When Shedeur Sanders spoke the way he did, he wasn't creating uncertainty out of thin air. He was responding to it. The uncomfortable truth is that the Cleveland Browns are not a picture of stability right now. From the outside, it might look like a young quarterback simply trying to stay focused. From the inside, it looks more like a player navigating an organization that hasn't fully defined its own future. Coaching questions are still hanging in the air. Direction at the top hasn't been clearly locked in. Even week to week, the identity of the team feels unsettled. And for a rookie quarterback, that matters more than fans often realize. Development doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens inside structure, trust, and continuity. Now add the on-field reality. Sanders has been asked to operate behind protection that hasn't consistently held up. He's taken hits. He's had to escape pressure early. He's been forced to improvise more than most young quarterbacks should at this stage. That doesn't mean he can't handle it, but it does mean he's learning under stress, not support. And that's where the discomfort sets in. When Shedeur Sanders says nothing is promised, he's not criticizing the Browns. He's acknowledging that the Browns haven't promised him anything. No public commitment. No clear declaration that he's the unquestioned future. Just opportunity, and opportunity can disappear fast in the NFL. From a player's perspective, that's reality, not pessimism. The Browns' history only amplifies this tension. This is a franchise known for cycling through quarterbacks quickly, known for resets, known for chasing fixes instead of building patiently. Sanders is well aware of that history. Any quarterback with access to a phone and a league network would be. So when fans hear his words and feel panic, they're reacting emotionally. When Sanders speaks them, he's reacting practically. He's playing well enough to believe in himself, but not foolishly enough to assume circumstances will automatically align. That's not disloyalty, that's awareness. This is what makes the situation uncomfortable for Cleveland. They want performance without pressure, loyalty without guarantees, commitment without clarity. And Sanders, intentionally or not, exposed that imbalance with a few calm sentences. Because here's the truth. If the Browns were fully settled, coaching secure, vision aligned, protection solid, this conversation wouldn't exist. The fact that it does says more about the organization than it does about the quarterback. And that's the reality Cleveland now has to confront. Not whether Sanders is good enough, but whether they're ready to give him a reason to believe. This is where the story naturally drifts into speculation, not because anyone has confirmed anything, but because this is how the NFL works when opportunity and uncertainty overlap. When a young quarterback speaks openly about nothing being promised, people around the league don't panic. They observe. And one organization that inevitably comes up in these conversations is the Pittsburgh Steelers. To be clear right up front, there are no reports that Shedeur Sanders wants out. There are no confirmed talks of Pittsburgh making a move. No credible source has suggested a trade request, back-channel maneuvering, or anything close to that. What exists instead is something far more common and far more dangerous for Cleveland. League awareness. The Steelers are known for stability, coaching continuity, a clear identity, a long history of protecting and developing quarterbacks within a system that doesn't reset every year. That reputation alone makes them a natural comparison point when discussing any quarterback playing in organizational uncertainty, especially one in the same division. And division rivals watch each other closer than anyone else. It's been said around league circles that teams always keep informal files on players they see multiple times a year. That doesn't mean pursuit. It means preparedness. It means knowing who's developing, who's frustrated, and who might become available down the line if circumstances change. That's where the speculation comes from. When Shedeur Sanders speaks candidly about not being able to control his future, people don't hear a threat. They hear flexibility. They hear a player who understands that his value isn't tied to one situation forever. And in a league desperate for young quarterbacks, that mindset doesn't go unnoticed. For the Cleveland Browns, that's the uncomfortable part. Not because Pittsburgh is circling today, but because other organizations will always be ready tomorrow if Cleveland hesitates. This is how speculation starts in the NFL. Not with rumors of demands, but with silence where reassurance usually lives. With a quarterback refusing to lock himself into a narrative before the organization does the same. With timing that invites questions instead of answers. And again, it's important to frame this properly. Speculation does not equal intent. Observation does not equal pursuit. But awareness is constant. The Steelers don't need to make a move for this to matter. All they need to do is watch, evaluate, and be prepared. That's what stable franchises do. They let other teams create openings. Which brings the focus right back where it belongs. This isn't really about Pittsburgh. It's about Cleveland. Because when rival teams even theoretically enter the conversation, it usually means something closer to home hasn't been settled yet. And until it is, the speculation won't disappear. There's a misconception that rookie quarterbacks have no real power, short contracts, limited control, expected obedience. On paper, that's true, but in practice, especially in today's NFL, the leverage shifts faster than most people realize. And Shedeur Sanders is a perfect example of how that quiet power starts to take shape. The league is starving for quarterbacks who can actually lead, not just throw, not just scramble, but command a huddle, absorb pressure, and improve in real time. When a young QB shows even flashes of that, the value curve changes immediately. Front offices know it, coaches know it, other teams definitely know it. That's where leverage begins. It doesn't start with demands or public ultimatums. It starts with performance paired with composure. It starts when a quarterback proves he can survive dysfunction without unraveling. Because once a player shows he can function in chaos, the league starts imagining what he could become in stability. That's dangerous for the team that hasn't committed yet. For the Cleveland Browns, this is the tension sitting just beneath the surface. Sanders is still a rookie. He's still developing. But he's also demonstrating traits teams pay a premium to secure: mental toughness, adaptability, and self-awareness. Those traits create leverage long before contracts do. And here's the key part most fans miss. Leverage doesn't mean a player wants out. It means a player doesn't need to beg in. By refusing to publicly anchor himself to a future that hasn't been defined, Sanders is protecting his optionality. He's signaling that his value isn't dependent on promises, it's dependent on production. That's a subtle but powerful shift. We've seen this pattern before across the league. When quarterbacks perform well enough early, organizations are forced into a choice: commit and build, or hesitate and risk losing control of the narrative. Even if no move happens immediately, the balance of pressure changes. The organization starts answering questions instead of asking them. This is why Sanders' calm delivery matters so much. There's no emotion for critics to latch onto, no outburst to discredit, just steady realism. And realism is harder to argue with than bravado. Of course, none of this guarantees outcomes. Leverage can disappear as quickly as it forms if performance dips or injuries intervene. But while it exists, it reshapes conversations behind closed doors. It accelerates timelines. It forces clarity. And that's the part that makes front offices uncomfortable. Because once a rookie quarterback proves he can handle the weight and understands the business around him, the power dynamic changes permanently. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. And those are usually the shifts that matter most. Strip away the headlines, the speculation, and the emotional reactions, and what Shedeur Sanders said becomes much clearer. This wasn't a threat, it wasn't a plea, and it definitely wasn't a rookie accidentally saying too much. It was a message rooted in realism. When Shedeur Sanders talked about controlling what he can control, he wasn't dodging responsibility. He was drawing a boundary. In a league where players are often expected to pledge loyalty before they're shown any, that distinction matters. He wasn't asking for guarantees. He was acknowledging that they don't exist. That's the part many people missed. Sanders didn't say he doesn't want to be in Cleveland. He said he can't promise what happens next year because he doesn't own the organization. That's not cold. That's accurate. Coaches get fired. Systems change. Depth charts flip overnight. For a rookie quarterback to pretend otherwise would actually be naive. What he was really saying is this: judge me on what I do, not on what I say. By refusing to give a scripted answer, Sanders avoided tying his identity to circumstances he can't influence. He didn't shift blame. He didn't criticize anyone. He simply placed the focus back on performance wins, clean football, improvement. That's not detachment. That's professionalism. For the Cleveland Browns, that message carries weight. It subtly flips the usual dynamic. Instead of the quarterback asking for belief, the organization is being asked, quietly, to define its direction. Not with words, but with actions. This is where the message becomes uncomfortable. If Sanders had said, "I'm the future here," fans would have cheered and moved on. But by saying nothing's promised, he forced honesty into the conversation. He reminded everyone that commitment is mutual. That belief goes both ways, and that development requires more than opportunity, it requires stability. Importantly, this wasn't defiance. There was no edge in his tone, no frustration, no bitterness. That calm delivery is what gives the message credibility. It suggests confidence without arrogance, awareness without entitlement. In other words, he wasn't distancing himself from Cleveland. He was protecting himself within it. And that's the real takeaway. Sanders wasn't speaking to fans. He wasn't speaking to rivals. He was speaking to reality. In a league that rewards clarity and punishes assumptions, that mindset isn't dangerous. It's necessary. The only question now is whether Cleveland heard what he was actually saying, or just reacted to how it sounded. What made this moment resonate wasn't the wording alone. It was the clarity behind it. In just a few calm sentences, Shedeur Sanders pulled back the curtain on a truth most players are trained to dance around. In the NFL, nothing is guaranteed, and pretending otherwise doesn't protect anyone. For the Cleveland Browns, that truth lands heavier than it would almost anywhere else. This is a franchise shaped by resets, restarts, and missed opportunities at the most important position in sports. Every time hope appears, it's followed by impatience or panic. That history is why Sanders' honesty felt unsettling, not because it was wrong, but because it forced accountability. This wasn't a rookie distancing himself from the team. It was a young quarterback refusing to sell certainty where none has been offered. And that distinction matters. He didn't demand a commitment. He didn't hint at leaving. He didn't air grievances. He simply acknowledged reality and chose to focus on what earns longevity in this league: performance, growth, and consistency. That puts the ball squarely back in Cleveland's court. Because moments like this become turning points whether teams want them to or not. The Browns can respond by building clarity, stability in coaching, protection up front, and a vision that gives a developing quarterback something real to invest in. Or they can let uncertainty linger and hope talent alone bridges the gap. History suggests hope isn't enough. The uncomfortable part for fans is this: quarterbacks who understand their value early tend to shape their own futures. Not loudly, not through drama, but through patience and leverage earned on the field. Sanders is already showing signs of that awareness, and it's why this conversation won't disappear after one press conference. If Cleveland gets this right, this moment will be remembered as maturity on both sides. A young quarterback speaking honestly, and an organization responding with purpose. If they get it wrong, it will be remembered as the warning sign everyone saw but no one acted on. And that's what makes this situation so important. This isn't about reading too much into a quote. It's about recognizing when a player stops talking like a placeholder and starts talking like someone planning a future, whether here or somewhere else. The Browns have spent years searching for their answer. They may already have him. The real test now is whether Shedeur Sanders can grow into the role. It's whether Cleveland can grow into the responsibility that comes with finally finding one.